Doug Gottlieb for Colin. This is The Herd on Fox Sports Radio, the iHeartRadio app, and Fox Sports 1. Let's welcome in three-time Pro Bowl linebacker, stud at Penn State. LeVar Arrington is our guest in The Herd. Fascinating to watch kind of the evolution of football. Look, as much as the offensive side has changed, the defensive side has changed,
sure.
Right? I'll never forget, I talked to Josh Rosen last year before a game he started against the Chargers, and he's like, I said, well, what's the biggest difference NFL to college? And he's like, honestly, the body types are all kind of the same now in terms of linebackers and defensive backs. There's maybe 10 pounds different as opposed to, it used to be, 260-pound linebackers. Mm-hmm. Now they're 230, 240 kind of flying around. The DBs are more in the 220 kind of variety. But it feels like that's what's happening with Zeke on the offensive side, is that these running backs, Gordon, Zeke Elliott, they're looking at their market and how it's flat, relatively flat in comparison to the wide receiver market, and they want to get out ahead of it, and that's why they want these deals a year early. Is that a crazy way of looking at it?
I don't think it's a crazy way of looking at it, Doug. Listen, the economics of the game are seemingly always increasing. The economics of how it applies to a certain position seem to always be evolving. So right now what you're dealing with is when you had guys like Adrian Peterson, the Jerome Bettises, the Marshall Faulks, you had a golden age of the running backs position. They were able to do a lot of different things: catch the ball out of the backfield, pass block, run the football. Culturally speaking, as it applies to football and your reference to Rosen and the things that he sees, the reason why things have changed so much is the culture of how the players are being developed has changed quite a bit.
Sure.
And the culture of how we consume these players has changed quite a bit. So it's on a couple different fold, right? You look at the 7-on-7 culture that has really, really taken youth sports by storm. It's really one of the major ways that talent is being evaluated and looked at. Well, what are the two positions that you look at the most when you're watching 7-on-7?
Quarterback and wide receiver.
There you go. You're not looking at running back. You're not looking at, and honestly speaking, you're really not looking at linebackers either. So now when you look at the value of what a running back and a linebacker represents, what is it? You're saying, okay, the linebacker that can get to the quarterback, a Khalil Mack, a Von Miller.
Joey Bosa.
Joey Bosa. So now you have these hybrid guys that could be a linebacker or a defensive end, but you're using them purely in the vein of getting to the guy who's throwing the ball. You're going to give your money to the guys who can stop the guys from catching the ball, and you're going to give it to the guys that can catch the ball, and you're going to give it to the guys that can deliver the ball.
Yeah. It's many ways similar to basketball, right? Basketball has evolved.
Sure.
Power forward is gone. Power forward is maybe the middle linebacker, I think, right? I mean,
it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, there's still middle. There's still Luke Kuechly's out there. There's still some, whereas there aren't any, not really power forwards. But, now you have a center who can either protect the rim or one that can stretch the floor and shoot, as opposed to
one that can do all of the above.
Right. Well, that's a
like
Joel Embiid.
A KD being right.
Well, no, that's a Joel Embiid.
Yes.
Right. And then you have all the wings are hybrid players, right? They can handle some. They can play on the ball. They can play off the ball. Like the old. I was a true traditional point guard. Like those guys don't really exist or have a ton of value.
It's difficult.
But a lot of it's the officiating as well, right? Because they've made it so difficult to defend wide receivers. They've given so hard to put any pressure on quarterback or touch a quarterback. They want those guys clean. On the other hand, they haven't changed any of the rules for running the football. Between the tackles, it's the same game, and so it beats those guys up. So I guess here's the question. You're the Dallas Cowboys. Technically, you got Zeke under contract this year, fifth-year extension next year if you want. You can franchise tag him for 2 years. You are under no pressure, and you got to deal with the Dak stuff, with Amari Cooper. There are several defensive players. Byron Jones, for example, Jalen Smith. There's some other guys. If you're advising Stephen Jones, what do you do?
Well, let me first start by saying this. The most interesting phenomenon to all of this, Doug, is the amount of coverage on what a person makes. I think that's the craziest phenomenon. If I was asking the team in the back. If I asked you what this person is making, what that person is making, what that person is making, would you know? And the conventional answer is no. People don't really know unless you're just forthcoming with saying what it is that you make. People don't generally know what other people at the same workplaces make. This is one of those strange phenomenons that governs and drives and pushes a lot of the aspects that take place in professional sports. So when you look at the situation that continues to replay itself out over and over, year in, year out, with players, I look at the Dallas Cowboys brand. It is one of, if not the strongest brand in sports. It's up there with the New England Patriots. It's up there with the Pittsburgh Steelers and the New York Giants. As you're talking football brands and franchises, it's labeled America's team. I don't think they're as good a team if they don't have Ezekiel Elliott in their backfield. But then now you have to ask yourself the question, Doug, is it more important to win games, or is it more important to keep intact what your business model is for how you approach what you're doing, where your dollars are going to go, and how they're going to be spent? And I think that that's going to be the largest question. And if the answer is we want to win a Super Bowl and we want to win games, then you have to find a happy medium of where you can win as a franchise and Ezekiel Elliott can win as a player. If it's based upon the economics surrounding the position and where it has evolved to and what it represents now, then you're now making a decision that says we are going to basically begin to move away from Ezekiel Elliott if he's not going to back down on what it is that his demands are. And quite frankly, the reality of it is at this point in the game, you can replace a running back easier than you can replace other players on the field.
No question. And that's there's two reasons. It's a great point you bring up about people don't know what other people make. I bring this up often. The Sunday paper, which people don't get the paper anymore, but people used to get it or still get it.
That was the deal.
Okay.
Especially the Sunday paper.
They would have the Parade magazine in there.
That was when All-Americans mattered.
Right.
Parade All-Americans.
No. But they had the Parade magazine would also have, once a year, they'd have what people make, right? And you'd be like, Poston makes $70,000? Like, man, what? The second you find out what somebody makes, you make a determination about if they're good or not good at their job. The difference is in the NFL, there's one pool, as you pointed out, it's one pool of money, right? It's not like Stephen Jones saves $5 million on Zeke, he puts it in his pocket. He's got to use that money
somewhere else.
Somewhere else. So I do think that it's got to be increasingly difficult when you got one guy who's holding out. You got a quarterback. You can't play without a quarterback. They have no plan B there. On the other hand, they don't actually have to pay Dak. And technically, next year they could franchise tag him as well. Same thing with Amari Cooper. Like it's a very hard calculus, especially when guys like Ezekiel Elliott want top dollar, and the last team to give a guy top dollar is Todd Gurley, and that doesn't look like a good deal a year later because Todd Gurley couldn't stay healthy.
It's always high risk, high reward when you're talking about paying players. There's also the example of Aaron Donald. We use Todd Gurley. Aaron Donald ends up getting his money. He plays. It's a production-driven business, right? We're sitting in a production-driven business. You got to produce, or they're going to find somebody who else can produce. And when you're dishing out top contracts, major contracts, you have to understand what the thought process is as to why you are signing on the dotted line to allot that money, allocate that money, and invest in the player to that degree. And that's why I thought it was so interesting, and not to, jump all over the place, but since we're talking about different players, I mean, you think about the situation, the exchange with an Odell Beckham ending up in Cleveland in a market that desperately needs to have athletes that can drive their market. And no greater example than what LeBron was able to do with their economic market when he was playing there. It makes you wonder, what's it worth to let Odell Beckham go from a New York franchise, the New York franchise, in terms of football? how does he get away? And you start to look at the economics of it. What are the implications of it? What were the ramifications of an Odell Beckham leaving the New York Giants?
Well, I mean, I think obviously it's got to be cultural. It's got to be they felt like they didn't have the control they wanted within the locker room, the proper structure within the locker room. And right or wrong, I don't think anybody argued with his talent. You know, his insistence that he was the reason on TV. Like, look, when the Giants play the Cowboys, they're on Fox at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Absolutely. It doesn't matter who's playing. That's the way we roll. I think that John Gruden had a good week.
Okay, let's jump to John.
Okay, just because last year people said he's nuts. He inherited a team that was bad. Mm-hmm. They had some good pieces, and for those good pieces, he got some salary cap relief, and he spent it on who's a guy who's arguably the best wide receiver in football, not without flaw, but he spent it on Antonio Brown. And if you look now at what Michael Thomas is making and what Odell's making, what others are going to make, it's a lower dollar figure. Mm-hmm. I kind of feel like Gruden, a year after being roundly criticized, doesn't look nearly as dumb as people would lead you to believe.
I think the verdict has to still be out on that one. And I think it's because there are some questionable decisions that they made in terms of guys that they drafted, people that they've brought in, people that they've let go. I don't think it's wise in any situation to let a guy of the caliber that Khalil Mack is, let him go for cap relief.
Yeah, but they couldn't. It's $90 million guaranteed. They were a bad foot. We agree they weren't a good football team. Whether where Khalil plays for him or doesn't play for him.
Well, sometimes you're not as far away from being a better team than you are. They went further away from being a better team when they allowed him to go.
No question. No question. But they weren't. That wasn't a playoff team. They're in division with Kansas City and the Chargers, who are both loaded with talent. One on the offensive side of the ball and now defensively with Kansas City. And the Chargers have they've collected an immense amount of talent. They just didn't have it. And so to give him $90 million, they wouldn't have been able to improve the rest of their roster the way they were able to. Like, no one's arguing that Khalil Mack's awesome. He's awesome. He's just not so awesome that you can sacrifice building a roster when your roster isn't particularly good around him.
We're looking at a situation where a coach and a GM are trying to probably, in essence, rebuild a broken organization.
Correct.
Let's be clear on that.
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you're looking at it from that perspective, what are your wins? What are your goals? What are you going for? Because you ultimately want to try to create as many positive outcomes as you possibly can as an organization. By saying that you save money by not giving, Antonio as much money as some of the other guys that have gone to other places, you'd have to assume that you're going to get the type of production out of Brown that you saw him get in Pittsburgh. Now, if that plays out, then John Gruden looks like and Mayock look like they did what they needed to do as it applies to that position. If it doesn't play out that way and you don't get the type of production out of him that you were anticipating getting, which you'd have to assume if the team isn't improved in some of the aspects that they've needed to improve in, you can't expect that a team is going to allow Antonio Brown to beat them. And you can't expect his production to be what it needs to be when you look at a guy like Julio Jones, who's in a stable environment. You look at, I look at the situation in Cleveland, and I'm not so sure that was a great move for Odell Beckham. I really don't. And everybody's excited about how much talent that they have in Cleveland. But, I've played on dysfunctional franchise teams that had a ton of talent from top to bottom, and they were unable to win. Right. They were unable to turn the corner. And it's culturally. You mentioned culturally earlier. It's culturally driven. It's not talent driven.
Right.
And so there are so many different components and moving parts as to why something will work versus why it doesn't work. So it gets very difficult because it can get very convoluted in terms of the information that it takes to be able to justify one decision over the other.
He's 3-time Pro Bowler. I said 13-time. You don't mind if I said 13.
I would love 13. Yeah, I get depressed every time this time of the year because I know I'm not going to get a gold jacket. I wore like more of an olive-colored jacket. I know the ceremony is tonight. Yeah. I won't get a gold one, but, this is kind of a cool color for a jacket to wear.
Thanks so much, LeVar. LeVar Arrington.
Appreciate you.
Let's get to John Goulet with the news.
No.